What happens when the man you married sees you as a trophy, but treats you as a burden? For Elara Vance, her marriage to the ambitious Julian Thorne was a quiet compromise. She lived simply, hiding a secret legacy to honor her father's wishes, while Julian climbed the social ladder, craving the validation of Miami's elite. But at the most exclusive yacht party of the season, Julian's ambition and cruelty collide. In a desperate attempt to impress his powerful friends, he publicly mocks his wife, calling her poor and simple. He has no idea that the woman he just humiliated doesn't just belong at the party. She could buy it, the yacht, and everyone on it. His single, cruel sentence is about to cost him everything. The thick, cream-colored cardstock felt heavy in Julian Thorne's hand. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a key. Embossed in gold leaf, the insignia of Donovan Reed, the tech mogul who had practically reinvented logistics, shimmered under the halogen lights of their sterile, high-rise apartment. An evening aboard the Olympian. This was it. This was the night that would cement his new status. Julian practiced his smile in the reflection of the glass balcony door. The Miami skyline glittered back at him. 1,000 rivals, 1,000 opportunities. He adjusted his silk tie, a deep sapphire blue that he'd been told brought out the predator in his eyes. He was a man on the rise, a partner at a boutique private equity firm, and he looked the part. All he needed was to land the Sterling account, and this party was the hunting ground. He turned his gaze inward to the living room, where his wife, Elara, was reading a book. She was, as always, an enigma of simplicity. She wore a simple linen dress, her dark hair was tied back, and she was lost in some history of maritime navigation. It was this simplicity that had first drawn him to her. He'd met her at a museum benefit. He, a rising star, and she, he'd assumed, a quiet, impressed volunteer. She was beautiful, but more importantly, she was uncomplicated. She required no maintenance, had no ambitious family, and seemed perfectly content to orbit his world. She was the perfect, unassuming accessory for a man like him. Lately, however, that simplicity had begun to grate on him. It felt less like humility, and more like a lack of drive. It felt poor. "Elara, are you even getting ready?" he snapped, the invitation tapping against his thigh. Elara looked up, her expression placid. "Of course, Julian. The boat doesn't even launch for 2 hours. I was just finishing this chapter." "It's not a boat, Elara, for God's sake. It's a 200-foot mega-yacht. It's the Olympian. Do you have any idea who will be there? Victoria Sterling will be there." He said the name with a reverence that bordered on absurd. "That's nice," Elara said, placing a simple leather bookmark between the pages. "I'm sure she'll be lovely." Julian scoffed, walking over to their bedroom closet. He pulled open his side, a meticulous row of dark suits and designer shirts. He then glanced at her side. It was functional. Simple sheath dresses, practical blouses. He felt a flash of genuine anger. "You're not wearing that, are you?" He gestured to the book in her lap. "I was planning on wearing the navy blue dress, the one you said you liked. The one from a department store, to Donovan Reed's party?" "Absolutely not." He pulled out a black, sequined number he'd bought her last Christmas, a frantic purchase after he'd forgotten their anniversary. "Wear this. And the diamonds I got you. Try to look like you belong." Elara's gaze hardened, just for a second. It was a subtle shift, like a deep-sea current changing direction, unseen on the surface. "The navy dress is fine, Julian. It's elegant." "It's safe, Elara. It's dull. Tonight is not about being safe. It's about being seen." He threw the sequined dress onto the bed. "I'm closing the Sterling deal tonight. Their entire shipping fleet needs restructuring. and I'm the man to do it. Victoria, her father, they need to see that I'm one of them, that we are one of them. I can't have my wife looking like she won a competition to be there." The cruelty in his voice was casual, honed by months of similar, smaller paper cuts. He was no longer the charming, attentive man who had wooed her with promises of a shared life. He was a man consumed by reflections, by the appearance of success, rather than the substance of it. Ilara stood up slowly. She was taller than he often remembered, and her posture, usually relaxed, straightened to something rigid. "I will be ready in an hour, Julian. I will wear the navy dress. It was a gift from my father." "Your father? The man who ran some boat repair shed?" Julian rolled his eyes. "Fine. Whatever. Just try to blend in. Don't talk about your volunteer work at the museum. Don't talk about old books. And please just smile and nod. Let me handle the conversation." He went into the bathroom to fix his hair, missing the look in his wife's eyes. It was not anger, and it was not hurt. It was the cold, clear look of a CEO making a final, difficult decision. She had hoped this moment would never come. She had tried, for 2 years, to honor her promise, to live a normal life, to find love with a man who wasn't blinded by the name Vance. Her father, Robert Vance, hadn't run a boat repair shed. He had built Vance Maritime Solutions, a colossus of the industry, a shipyard that built and refitted everything from naval destroyers to the very mega yachts the new money crowd adored. When he passed, he left her everything, with one dying wish. Don't let the money own you, Ilara. Live a real life. Find someone who loves you, not the balance sheet. Hide it until you know for sure. She had tried. She had met Julian, who seemed so different, so driven by his own merits. She had fallen for the idea of him. But tonight, listening to him drip venom and ambition, she realized her father's test had just yielded its final, definitive result. Julian Thorne hadn't just failed. He had failed spectacularly. She picked up her phone and sent a single text message to a number not saved under any name. "Marcus. Change of plans. I will be at the Reed party tonight. Please be there. It's time." The reply was instantaneous. "Acknowledged, Miss Vance." She laid the navy dress out on the bed. It was a simple, bespoke silk gown from a designer whose name Julian wouldn't recognize, but Victoria Sterling absolutely would. It was the color of the deep ocean, and it had cost more than Julian's last 2 bonuses combined. He just didn't have the eye to see it. He saw the world in sequins and brand names. He had no idea what real, quiet power looked like. The launch boat cut through the dark waters of Biscayne Bay, its twin engines a throaty hum. The air was thick with salt and money. Julian was electric, vibrating with nervous energy. He'd barely spoken to Ilara on the drive to the marina, too busy rehearsing his talking points for Victoria's father, muttering about leverage and logistics. Ilara sat beside him, a portrait of calm, her hands folded in her lap. As the Olympian came into view, even Julian was forced into a stunned silence. It wasn't a yacht. It was a floating skyscraper. Lights cascaded down its white hull, illuminating 3 separate decks, a helicopter pad, and a glass-walled swimming pool on the stern. Staff in crisp white uniforms stood ready at the boarding platform. "My God," Julian breathed, his eyes wide. This is real power." "No, it's not," Ilara thought, her gaze analytical. "It's just a boat, a very large, very complex boat. I know the man who designed the stabilization system. He owes me a favor." They stepped aboard onto a teak deck polished to a mirror shine. A string quartet played softly near a cascading champagne fountain. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of oysters and caviar. And the crowd, It was a glittering sea of Miami's most powerful. Tech billionaires, real estate tycoons, and old money matriarchs all mingled, their laughter light and sharp. Julian immediately transformed. His shoulders squared, his rehearsed smile clicked into place. He grabbed 2 glasses of champagne, handed one to Elara without looking at her, and scanned the crowd. "There, that's Victoria," he hissed, nodding toward the aft deck. Victoria Sterling was the absolute center of her own universe. She was stunning in a fire-engine red dress that left little to the imagination, her blonde hair swept up in a complex, dazzling style. She was surrounded by a coterie of admirers, laughing loudly at something one of them had said. She was, Elara noted, the exact opposite of herself. She was loud, where Elara was quiet. She was obvious, where Elara was subtle. "Julian, darling," Victoria shrieked, spotting him. She air-kissed him, her eyes flicking over to Elara and dismissing her in the same microsecond. "You made it. And you brought—" "My wife, Elara," Julian said, his voice a fraction too hearty. "Elara, this is Victoria Sterling, of Sterling Shipping." "A pleasure to meet you," Elara said, offering a polite smile. Victoria's eyes did a slow, insulting inventory of Elara, from her simple hair to her unadorned neck, and finally to the deep blue dress. There was a flash of recognition in Victoria's eyes. She, unlike Julian, recognized the designer, and it was followed by a flash of confusion. Why would this mousy woman be in a gown like that? She must have borrowed it. "Charmed," Victoria said, the word dripping with insincerity. "Julian, Daddy is over by the bar. He's dying to talk about your proposal. He finds it adorable." She linked her arm through Julian's. "Let's go, shall we? We can leave your +1 here to explore." She looks like she enjoys a good buffet. The insult was so overt, so brazen, that even Julian flinched. But the pull of the Sterling deal was stronger than any loyalty to his wife. Yes, of course. He gave Elara a panicked, apologetic glance. "You'll be okay, right, Elara? Just mingle." He let Victoria pull him away, his back rigid. Elara watched him go, feeling not a shred of jealousy, only a profound, cold pity. He was a fish swimming desperately toward a lure, blind to the hook. She turned away from the crowd and walked toward the railing, looking out not at the party, but at the dark, industrial sprawl of the port of Miami. The lights of the gantry cranes moved like giant, patient spiders. And there, in the center of it all, was the massive, floodlit complex of Vance Maritime Solutions, her shipyard. From here, she could see the dry dock where a U.S. Navy destroyer was currently undergoing a billion-dollar refit. She could see the glowing torch of a night shift welder, a tiny spark of real work in a world of glittering illusion. "It's an impressive view, isn't it?" A man had come to stand beside her. He was older, in a perfectly tailored but unremarkable grey suit. He had a kind, tired face and watchful eyes. "Marcus," Elara said, her voice low. "Thank you for coming." Marcus Cole, COO of Vance Maritime, nodded. "I wouldn't miss it, Ms. Vance. Donovan Reed," he gestured to the party's host, "has been trying to get me to one of these for a year. He's a good client." "He is," Elara agreed. "His new logistics fleet. We're building all 12 hulls." "He doesn't know, does he?" Marcus asked, looking at her. "That the Elara Vance who signs the checks is the Elara Thorne standing here? No. He just knows my father's COO. As per my father's wishes, the Vance family stays out of the spotlight. You're the face, Marcus. You always have been." "I wish I was happy to honor," Marcus said, his voice softening. "But Robert, he never would have wanted you to be unhappy. He never would have tolerated a man like that. He nodded discreetly toward Julian, who was now laughing obsequiously at something Victoria's father, a gruff man named Henry, was saying. "I know," Elara said, her voice tight. "I needed to be sure. I needed to know if he loved me, or the life I could have given him. It turns out he doesn't love me, and he's just angry I'm not giving him that life." "So the storm protocol?" Marcus asked quietly. "Yes. Is everything in place?" "As of 4 p.m. today," Marcus confirmed, checking his watch. "The acquisition of Sterling Shipping's outstanding debt was finalized. We bought it from the Singaporean bank for 40 cents on the dollar. Henry Sterling doesn't know it yet, but as of this moment, you are his bank, and he's in default." "And Julian's firm?" "Even easier. Your husband, I'm afraid, is a very poor gambler. He leveraged his firm to the hilt on a bad currency speculation. The trust your father set up for you, the one Julian doesn't know about, has been quietly buying his debt for months. He's personally liable for, well, everything." A cold knot of finality settled in Elara's stomach. This was the point of no return. "So he's ruined." "He will be," Marcus said. "All it takes is one call from our lawyers." Elara watched her husband. He was posturing, gesticulating wildly, explaining some concept to Henry Sterling, who looked profoundly bored. Julian was so busy performing success that he hadn't noticed he had already failed. "Not yet," Elara said. "I want him to have his moment. I want him to get everything he thinks he wants. Let him believe he's won." "That's a cruel game, Elara," Marcus observed, though not unkindly. "He's a cruel man," Elara replied, turning back to the lights of her shipyard. "He just doesn't know it yet. He thinks it's ambition. Let him have his night. I'll have the rest of my life." An hour later, Julian was floating. He was drunk, not on champagne, but on proximity to power. He and Victoria had been inseparable. Their conversation, a rapid-fire exchange of names, places, and veiled financial gossip. Henry Sterling had clapped him on the shoulder and said, "I like your style, Thorne. We'll talk Monday." He had made it. He was in. He found Elara exactly where he'd left her, by the railing, staring at the port. She was holding the same, untouched glass of champagne. He felt a sudden, sharp surge of resentment. He had just conquered the world, and she was moping. She hadn't even tried to network. She was an anchor, a dead weight on his ascent. Victoria sashayed up beside him, her eyes sharp. "Is she all right, Julian? She hasn't moved all night. Is she intimidated?" "She's fine," Julian slurred, louder than he intended. "She's just not used to this." "Clearly," Victoria said, her voice a purr. She raised her voice just enough for the surrounding guests to tune in. "That's a sweet dress, Elara. Did you make it?" A few people snickered. Elara turned, her face a polite, unreadable mask. "It's a Gaultier," she said simply. Victoria's smile faltered. She knew the name. "Oh, a vintage piece, then. How frugal." Julian, sensing he was losing the upper hand and desperate to realign himself with Victoria, stepped forward. He felt the need to perform, to show Victoria and the others that he was one of them, that he saw Elara through their eyes. "Darling, don't be rude," Julian said to Victoria, before turning the knife on his wife. "Elara doesn't care about fashion. She's simpler than that." He reached out and, in a gesture of profound contempt, flicked the sleeve of her dress. "She's my little charity project, aren't you, Elara? Keeps me humble." The small circle of listeners laughed. Elara's face remained perfectly still, but her eyes, her very dark, very deep eyes, locked on his. "Julian, don't," she said, her voice a low warning. But he was too far gone, fueled by alcohol and the intoxicating approval of Victoria Sterling. He wanted to finalize his allegiance. He wanted to sever the tie to his simple life. "It's true," he announced to the group. "I found her volunteering at the Maritime Museum, dusting off old ship models. Can you believe it? She doesn't have an ambitious bone in her body." He leaned in, as if sharing a conspiratorial secret, but his voice carried across the deck. "I have to be honest, it's refreshing. In a world full of sharks, it's nice to have a little guppy. She's just, poor. Not just in money, but in spirit. No fire, no drive. But she's pretty, isn't she?" There it was. The word, poor. It hung in the humid air, stark and ugly. The laughter around them died, replaced by a few uncomfortable coughs. Even Victoria looked slightly taken aback by the raw, public cruelty. Julian had crossed a line. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public disavowal. He had, in effect, drawn a line in the sand, placing himself on the side of the glitterati and casting his wife onto the other. Elara didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held his gaze. The silence stretched, becoming louder than the music, louder than the waves lapping against the hull. She looked past Julian to the people gathered around him. She saw their expressions: pity, embarrassment, and a strange, cold curiosity. They were waiting for the scene, for the tears. Instead, Elara straightened her spine. She set her untouched champagne glass on a passing waiter's tray. She looked at Julian, not as a wife, but as a stranger. "Is that what you think of me, Julian?" she asked, her voice clear and carrying. "Elara, don't make a scene," he hissed, his buzz rapidly fading, replaced by the cold fear that he'd miscalculated. "No," Elara said, her voice gaining a resonance it had never had before. "I believe you are the one making the scene." She looked at Victoria Sterling. "You're trying to restructure your father's debt. Julian is proposing a hostile takeover of your smaller competitors, funded by new bonds." Victoria's jaw dropped. "How could you possibly? And you, Julian," Elara continued, her voice like ice. "You think Henry Sterling is going to talk on Monday. You think you've won." "Elara, shut up," Julian whispered, his face turning pale. "You're drunk." "I haven't had a drink all night." She looked around at the silent, watching guests. "My husband mocked me for being poor. He mocked me for being simple. He mocked me for having no ambition." She took a step toward him. He instinctively took a step back. "You're right about one thing, Julian," she said. "I am simple. I believe in loyalty. I believe in promises. And I believe in finishing what my father started." She turned her back on him and walked toward the main salon, where Donovan Reed, the host, was standing near the microphone, looking deeply uncomfortable. She walked straight past him, up the few steps to the small stage where the string quartet had been playing. They stopped, their bows hovering over their strings. "What is she doing?" Victoria whispered, horrified. "She's lost her mind," Julian muttered, moving to intercept her. But before he could, Marcus Cole stepped into his path, a large, solid, immovable object. "I wouldn't, Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, his voice polite. "Get out of my way, you," Julian spat. "No!" Elara stood on the stage, overlooking the entire party. She wasn't a mousy, simple woman anymore. She was something else entirely. She waited, perfectly still, until every eye was on her. The music had stopped. The only sound was the thrum of the yacht's engines. This wasn't the plan. The plan, as conceived by Elara and Marcus, was a quiet, legal dismantling. A series of phone calls on Monday morning. A bloodless coup executed by lawyers in sterile boardrooms. Julian would have been served divorce papers and foreclosure notices simultaneously, a neat, tidy end to his delusions. But his public cruelty had demanded a public response. Her father had built his company on a bedrock of respect for his workers, his clients, and his own name. Julian hadn't just insulted Ilara. He had insulted the Vance legacy by treating his wife as a disposable accessory. Standing on that stage, Ilara wasn't thinking about her humiliation. She was thinking about the first time her father had taken her to the shipyard. She was 8 years old, and he'd placed a welder's helmet on her head and let her watch a team fuse 2 massive plates of steel. "This is what we do, Ilara," his voice had echoed in the helmet. "We take strong things, and we put them together to build something even stronger. Something that can withstand any storm. You remember that." She had spent her life withstanding storms. This was just another. She scanned the crowd. She saw Julian, his face a mottled mask of rage and confusion, being blocked by Marcus. She saw Victoria Sterling, her smugness replaced by a dawning, frantic calculation. She saw the host, Donovan Reed, staring at her, his billionaire's brain finally putting 2 and 2 together. He had seen Marcus Cole's name on Shipyard contracts, and now he was seeing Marcus act as a bodyguard for Julian Thorne's simple wife. Ilara took a deep breath. She didn't need the microphone. Her voice, trained by years of addressing shareholders and union leaders in cavernous halls, all under the radar, all as her father's proxy, was clear and strong. "Good evening, everyone. My apologies for interrupting." A nervous ripple went through the crowd. This was better than they could have hoped. "My name is Ilara Vance. For the past 2 years, many of you have known me as Ilara Thorne, Julian Thorne's wife." She paused, letting the name Vance settle in the air. To most, it meant nothing. To the real players, to Donovan Reed, to Henry Sterling, to the shipping bankers in the corner, it was a tectonic plate shifting. Vance, as in Vance Maritime Solutions. "My husband," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion, "just made a speech. He informed you all that I am poor, simple, and without ambition. He called me his charity project." She locked eyes with Julian. "I am here to correct the record." Julian's blood ran cold. This wasn't Ilara. This was someone he had never seen before. "Ilara, stop this! You're embarrassing yourself!" he shouted. "No, Julian, I'm embarrassing you." She turned her attention to the host. "Donovan, thank you for inviting us tonight. The Olympian is a magnificent vessel. My engineers were particularly proud of the new stabilization system we installed during her refit at our facility last quarter. I hope she's running smoothly." Donovan Reed's face went white. The refit had cost $80 million. He had negotiated it personally with Marcus Cole, who had repeatedly mentioned the owner was a stickler for details. He looked from Ilara to Marcus and back again. "Ilara, Vance," he said, the name clicking into place. "My God." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Ilara then turned her gaze to Victoria Sterling. "Victoria, you were concerned about my dress. You called it frugal. It is. I prefer to be frugal with my personal luxuries so that I can be generous in my business dealings." "What are you talking about?" Victoria snapped, her bravado crumbling. "I'm talking about your father's company, Sterling Shipping," Ilara said. "A fine old line company. Unfortunately, it's leveraged to the point of bankruptcy. As of 4 p.m. today, Vance Maritime Solutions acquired the entirety of your $400 million debt portfolio from your creditors, which means, as of this moment, I own your father's company. You, your father, and your entire family. Victoria, you work for me." Victoria swayed, grabbing a railing for support. Her father, Henry, pushed through the crowd, his face purple. "That's impossible. Our deal was with a Singaporean bank, who were very happy to sell a non-performing asset," Marcus Cole called out from the floor. "The paperwork is at your office, Henry. You are in breach of covenant. We'll be calling a board meeting Monday to discuss the new management structure." The silence was absolute. The partygoers were frozen, watching the most brutal, efficient corporate execution they had ever witnessed. Finally, Elara turned her full, undivided attention to her husband. Julian was shaking. This was a nightmare. It was a prank. It was impossible. The mousy woman he'd married, the one he'd left at home so many nights, the one he'd just publicly destroyed, owned the Sterlings. "Julian," Elara said, and now her voice was soft, but it cut deeper than any shout. "You came here tonight to land the Sterling account. You wanted to be a player. You wanted to impress them with your ambition." She took a step closer to the edge of the stage. "The problem, Julian, is that you have no ambition. You only have an appetite. You don't want to build anything. You just want to have things. You wanted to have me. You wanted to have the respect of these people." "Elara, please, what is this?" he begged, his voice cracking. "What are you doing?" "I'm answering your question," she said. "You mocked me for being poor. Julian, I am the sole owner and CEO of Vance Maritime Solutions. My father, Robert Vance, left it to me. The boat repair shed you so dismissively refer to is the single largest private employer in the state of Florida. This yacht we are standing on, it's my client's. The port you're looking at, it's my domain. The entire Sterling shipping fleet you were so desperate to advise, it's my new and most problematic asset." She paused, letting the weight of her words crush him. "You called me poor. Julian, you are the poor one, and not just in spirit." This was the part she dreaded, and the part she knew was most necessary. The humiliation of her husband was a private matter that he had made sickeningly public, but his financial ruin was a public fact, one he had simply been hiding. You're lying," Julian stammered, his eyes darting around for an ally. He found none. The faces of the guests were cold, fascinated. They were sharks, just as he'd said, and they smelled blood. His blood. You're a volunteer. I pay for our apartment. I pay for your life. Do you, Julian?" Elara asked, her voice laced with a sadness that was almost genuine. "Do you really?" She looked to Marcus, who gave a single, curt nod. "Let's talk about your firm, Thorn Capital," Elara said, her voice rising to project across the deck once more. "A boutique firm. So boutique, in fact, that it has been functionally insolvent for 8 months. Julian's breath hitched. That's a lie." "Is it?" Elara challenged. "Or is it true that you lost 70% of your client's capital on a disastrous yen trade in March? Is it true that you've been covering the losses by moving money between accounts, a move that the SEC would call, let's see, wire fraud? How? As I said, I'm a frugal person. I like to know where my money is going, especially when it's my money you've been losing." She let that statement hang in the air. Julian's mind, already reeling, tried to process the new information. His losses. Her money. "The apartment, Julian. The lease is in my name. The car you drive, it's registered to a holding company I own. Your suits, your watches, even your membership at the golf club. For the last 2 years, they have all been paid for. Not by your brilliant trades, but by a discretionary trust my father set up for me. a trust I've been drawing from to cover my husband's failures. She was dismantling him, piece by piece, in front of the very people he idolized. You didn't marry a charity project, Julian. You are one. My charity project. I was paying for the illusion of your success, waiting for the man I thought I married to show up, waiting for you to be honest with me, waiting for you to show a single shred of integrity. She shook her head, a gesture of final, profound disappointment. But you couldn't. You just kept digging, kept lying, and kept posturing. You thought you were a wolf, but you were just a scared little boy, spending his wife's allowance and insulting her to feel powerful. Julian Thorne crumpled. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a slow, agonizing deflation. His shoulders slumped. His face, so arrogant just moments before, became the face of a terrified, cornered child. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, grey sheen. He looked from Elara's cold, commanding face to Victoria's, which was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, directed entirely at him. He looked at Henry Sterling, who looked like he was about to have a stroke. He had not just failed to land the account. He had brought the woman who was about to destroy them all as his +1. Elara, no, please, he whispered, taking a step toward the stage. I love you. I didn't mean it. It was the champagne. It was them. He pointed a shaking finger at Victoria. She made me say it. She doesn't understand us. It was the most cowardly, most pathetic defense possible. Victoria, who had just lost her family's empire, reacted with predictable venom. "You pig!" she shrieked, lunging at him, her hands clawed. "You brought this snake here to ruin me." "Get her off me," Julian yelped, stumbling backward. "Enough!" Elara's voice cracked like a whip. Victoria froze. Julian froze. "Marcus," Elara said. Marcus Cole stepped forward. "Mr. Reed," he said to the host, "my apologies for this unpleasantness. Miss Vance will, of course, compensate you for the disruption to your evening." No, of course not," Donovan Reed stammered, clearly awestruck. "This is, please, whatever you need." "We need security," Marcus said, "to escort Mr. Thorne off the vessel. He is no longer a guest of Miss Vance." "No!" Julian cried, a raw, desperate sound. "Elara, you can't do this! It's me! It's Julian! We're married!" Elara walked down from the stage, her simple navy dress rippling around her. She stopped directly in front of him. The entire party was silent, watching this final, brutal confrontation. She looked at him, her eyes searching his for any sign of the man she had once loved, any sign of remorse for his cruelty, not just for his consequences. She found nothing, only terror. "The marriage is over, Julian," she said, her voice quiet enough for only him to hear, though every guest strained to listen. "You will be served with divorce papers in the morning. Your accounts, which are all linked to mine, will be frozen as of midnight. The car is being repossessed tomorrow. The apartment, you have 48 hours to vacate. A moving company will pack your personal belongings and send them to, well, I'm sure you'll find somewhere to stay." "I'll have nothing," he gasped, tears of self-pity streaming down his face. You're destroying me." "No, Julian," Elara said, her voice final. "You destroyed yourself. You just wanted an audience for it. And tonight, you got one." She turned to Marcus. "Please get him off my client's yacht." Two of Donovan Reed's large, private security guards, who had been standing discreetly by the salon doors, moved forward. They each took one of Julian's arms. "No, get your hands off me! Elara, Elara!" He was dragged, protesting and weeping, across the immaculate teak deck. The crowd parted for him, their faces a mixture of disgust and dark satisfaction. He was a fraud, and he had been exposed. There was no greater sin in their world. They took him to the service launch, not the grand mahogany boat he had arrived on, but the small, functional tender used by staff. As they bundled him onto the boat, he had one last wild look back at the party. Elara was already turned away from him. She was in a quiet, intense conversation with a pale Henry Sterling. She hadn't even watched him leave. His humiliation was so complete that it was already an afterthought. The launch's engine sputtered to life, and Julian Thorne was ferried away into the darkness, leaving the glittering, gilded cage and his wife behind. The party, for all intents and purposes, was over. The string quartet did not resume playing. The shocked whispers of the guests were the only soundtrack. Within minutes, the first launch boats were called. No one wanted to be the next person to draw the attention of Elara Vance. Victoria Sterling, after shooting Elara a look of such concentrated venom that it was almost impressive, had stormed off to find her father, who was now slumped in a deck chair, clutching his chest. Donovan Reed, the host, approached Elara tentatively. "Miss Vance, Elara, I am stunned and deeply impressed. Your father was a legend. It's clear his legacy is in formidable hands." Elara gave him a small, weary smile. "Thank you, Donovan. And again, my apologies for the scene. It was unavoidable." "Not at all," Reed said, his eyes glittering with the thrill of it all. "It was the most honest party I've ever hosted." He lowered his voice. "The refit. It was perfect. I have a new project, a fleet of autonomous container ships. I was going to put it out to tender, but I'd rather just give it to you." "Send the specs to Marcus's office," Elara said. "We'll have a proposal by end of week." "Done." He kissed her hand, a gesture of newfound, profound respect. "Good night, Miss Vance." "Good night, Donovan." As the yacht emptied, Elara was left standing at the rail with Marcus. The warm Miami air had a chill to it now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the hollow ache of what was, at its core, a profound failure. Her marriage, her trust. "Well," Marcus said, sipping a glass of water, "that was certainly more dramatic than a Monday morning phone call." Elara let out a long breath she felt she'd been holding for 2 years. "He made it public, Marcus. He put a price tag on my dignity. I just showed him he couldn't afford it." "And the Sterlings?" "Henry will cooperate," Elara said, watching the man being helped onto a boat by his daughter. "He has no choice. We'll restructure the company, replace the board, and absorb their fleet into our logistics division. It will be profitable within a year. Victoria, she will be the problem. Make sure her corporate accounts and access are frozen by morning." "Consider it done," Marcus said. He looked at his boss, her face illuminated by the distant city lights. "Robert would have been... well, he would have been furious you married that idiot. But he would have been damn proud of how you ended it." "I just want to go home, Marcus," Elara said. "Which one?" he asked gently. She smiled. Not the empty, polite smile she'd worn for Julian, but a real, small, tired smile. "The one by the water, the one my father built. The car is waiting at the marina." They took the launch back in silence. The city lights seemed sharper, the air cleaner. When they reached the marina, there was no sign of Julian. He was already a ghost, absorbed by the city that had no tolerance for high-profile failures. Instead of the black sedan Julian used, a different car was waiting, a simple, dark green Range Rover, old but impeccably maintained. It had been her father's. She got into the driver's seat. It felt right. "Will you be all right, Elara?" Marcus asked, his hand on the door. "I will be," she said, her voice firm. "This was a necessary correction, a chapter that needed to end. tomorrow, the real work begins. I want to be at the shipyard at 6 a.m. We have a destroyer to deliver. I'll see you there, boss. Elara drove away from the glittering high-rises of downtown. She left behind the sterile apartment that had never felt like a home. She drove south, past the glowing port, past her port, and toward the quiet, old-money enclave of Coconut Grove, where a sprawling, unpretentious house sat hidden behind a canopy of banyan trees. She walked in and the house was silent, smelling of old wood and the sea. She shed the navy blue dress, leaving it on the floor, and pulled on an old, soft t-shirt and sweatpants. She made a cup of tea and walked out onto the back terrace, which overlooked the dark, quiet bay. She had hidden herself for 2 years, trying to honor a promise, trying to find a man who wouldn't be defined by her wealth. She had failed to find the man, but she had, in the process, found herself again. The mask of the simple wife was gone, and she was left with the woman her father had raised, strong, capable, and in charge. The humiliation of the night faded, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Julian Thorne was a mistake, a painful, expensive, and deeply embarrassing mistake. But he was also a lesson. Never again would she make herself small to make a man feel big. Never again would she confuse ambition with appetite. Her phone buzzed. It was a news alert from a financial wire. Donovan Reed announces exclusive, multi-billion-dollar autonomous shipping contract with Vance Maritime Solutions. Shares in competitors plummet. She smiled, a true, sharp smile this time. She sipped her tea as the sun began to hint at its arrival, painting the eastern sky in shades of grey and violet. It was a new day. 6 months to the day after the party aboard the Olympian, the Miami sun was just as bright. But the world had shifted on its axis. The air at Vance Maritime Solutions was filled with the sharp scent of ozone and salt, and the roar of industry was punctuated by a palpable sense of occasion. Elara Vance stood on a raised platform, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant ponytail. She wore no jewelry, save for her father's simple steel watch. Her suit was a practical, sharp charcoal grey. Before her, dwarfing the pier, sat the Navigator, the first of Donovan Reed's fully autonomous, liquid natural gas-powered container ships. It was a behemoth of steel and code, a vessel that would, quite literally, change the world. A crowd of hundreds was gathered on the pier, the entire day-shift engineering team, union leaders, maritime press, and a visibly ecstatic Donovan Reed. Elara stepped up to the microphone. There was no tremor in her hands, no hesitation in her voice. The mousy, accommodating +1 was a ghost, a shed skin. When my father, Robert Vance, founded this shipyard, she began, her clear voice projecting over the hum of the crowd. He did so with a simple creed: build it strong, build it right, and build it to last. He believed in the power of real work. He believed that what we do here, in the heat and the grime, is the engine of the modern world. He saw the ships, not just the balance sheets. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the welders and draftsmen in the front rows. For the last few years, our company has operated from the shadows. We honored my father's wish for privacy. But today, we honor his legacy of innovation. The Navigator is not just a ship. It is a promise. It is the result of thousands of hours, of brilliant minds and calloused hands working in concert to build something the world has never seen. Vance Maritime is not just building ships. We are building the future. The applause was thunderous, genuine. Donovan Reed, taking the podium next, was even more effusive. I've worked with shipyards all over the world, he boomed. No one has the integrity, the vision, And the sheer competence of Ilara Vance and her team. She is a giant, and I am honored to be her partner." Ilara simply nodded, a small professional smile on her lips. She had just publicly cemented a $50 billion contract. Later, as the press swarmed the new ship, Ilara stood with Marcus Cole in the quiet of the main observation tower, watching the organized chaos below. "The launch was flawless, boss," Marcus said, handing her a tablet. "The launch was the easy part," Ilara replied, her eyes already scanning the next dry dock. "The real test is the Pacific crossing. How is the Sterling fleet integration?" 95% complete, Marcus said, tapping the screen. "We've refitted the last of Henry's rust buckets. The entire fleet is now profitable. As for Henry, he accepted our retirement package. He's living in a very quiet, very modest condo in Boca." "And Victoria?" Ilara asked, her voice neutral. Marcus permitted himself a small, dry smile. She, did not take it well. She tried to sue. She sued you for emotional distress, her father for mismanagement, and Mr. Reed for conspiracy. The courts threw out all 3 cases. Her legal bills, which she couldn't pay, forced her to sell her penthouse. Last I heard, she was living with an aunt in Palm Beach and trying to launch a lifestyle brand on Instagram. It has 17 followers. Ilara processed this, her face unreadable. There was no triumph, only a quiet finality, a predictable outcome. And the other one? She never used Julian's name. He was simply the other one. "The divorce was finalized last week," Marcus reported, his tone all business. He and his legal team were loud. They demanded half of everything. They postured. They threatened. And I presented them with the consolidated file. Not just the evidence of his wire fraud and embezzlement of your trust fund, but the affidavits from 2 of his former partners attesting to the fact that he'd been running a Ponzi scheme for 3 years. His entire firm was a house of cards. Ilara's blood ran cold just for a second. It was worse than she'd even known. His lawyers, Marcus continued, advised him to accept your generous offer. Which was? We pay for his one-way bus ticket to Omaha, Nebraska, where his mother lives. We do not press federal charges. He signs away any and all claims to your name, your assets, and your company forever. He is legally barred from coming within 500 miles of Miami. He signed. It wasn't a question. He signed, Marcus confirmed. He is, as of this morning, working in a call center for a subprime auto lender. He's gone, Ilara. A ghost. Ilara turned from the window and looked at the man who had been her father's right hand, and was now hers. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. Just protecting the company, boss, he said, though his eyes were kind. That evening, Ilara didn't go back to the sprawling house in Coconut Grove. Instead, she drove her father's old Range Rover to the Miami Maritime Museum. It was closed to the public, but the director, an old family friend, let her in. She walked through the silent halls, past the old maps and sextants, until she stood in front of a brand-new, gleaming glass wing. A simple plaque was on the wall, the Robert Vance Pavilion for Maritime Studies. Inside, it wasn't a stuffy collection of relics. It was a vibrant, high-tech STEM lab. Interactive screens showed the physics of displacement. A wave tank simulated hull integrity. It was designed for the city's underprivileged students, a place to learn a real, tangible trade, a place to learn how to build. She stood there for a long time, her hand on the cool glass. This was his legacy, not the money, not the power. This, the act of creation. She found the exhibit she'd been looking for in the old wing. It was a dusty, forgotten model of a 19th century clipper ship. She had, in fact, been dusting it the day Julian Thorne had walked in, all predatory charm and expensive cologne. She remembered the conversation. He'd said, "You must be so bored, all these old dusty things." She'd replied, "I'm not. I think they're beautiful. They changed the world." He'd laughed, a smooth, condescending sound. "Well, I'm here to change the world in a different way. And you're too beautiful to be dusting someone else's memories." He had never, she realized, seen her at all. He had seen a beautiful, simple, uncomplicated backdrop for his own ambition. He had seen a prop. He hadn't seen the woman who could, on that very day, have bought and sold his entire firm with a single phone call. He hadn't seen the woman who understood the complex engineering of the very ship she was dusting. She felt a sudden, profound pity for him. Not for the call center employee in Omaha, but for the man on that yacht. He had been so blind, so desperate for the appearance of power, that he had never once stopped to feel the substance of it. She left the museum and drove to the shipyard. The night shift was in full swing, the yard ablaze with floodlights, a man-made constellation. She took the industrial elevator to the very top of the main gantry crane, 500 feet in the air. The wind up here was fierce, whipping her hair from its ponytail. But she stood unbothered, her hands on the steel rail. The view was breathtaking. To the east, the glittering artificial skyline of Miami. To the west, the dark, sprawling, sleeping city. And below her, the yard. Her yard, a symphony of fire and steel. "He never came up here, did he?" Marcus had come up behind her, holding 2 hard hats. She took hers and put it on. "Once," she said, her voice almost lost in the wind. "He said the view was industrial. He wanted to know why I wasn't looking at the skyline." Marcus nodded, looking out at the city. "The skyline is where the money is kept. This," he swept his hand over the yard, "is where it's made." "He saw the grime, not the ships," Ilara said, her eyes fixed on a welder's torch, a brilliant blue star in the dark. "He saw the work, but he never understood the worth." She took a deep breath, the air tasting of metal and the sea. The humiliation of that night was gone. The anger was gone. The marriage was a footnote, a lesson in due diligence. She was not her father's heir. She was not Julian's ex-wife. She was Ilara Vance, the woman who owned the shipyard, and as the night shift began its long, loud, powerful work, she turned her back to the glittering, hollow city and faced the fire. The story of Ilara Vance and Julian Thorne is a powerful, painful reminder that a person's worth is never determined by the labels others try to put on them. Julian, blinded by his own ambition, saw his wife as poor and simple, failing to see the immense strength and power she held in silence. He built his life on a foundation of lies and arrogance, only to watch it all crumble when the truth, in the form of his humble wife, was finally revealed. Ilara, forced to choose between a toxic marriage and her father's legacy, found that her greatest power wasn't just in her name or her company, but in the dignity she refused to sacrifice. What did you think of Julian's downfall? Was Ilara's revenge too harsh, or exactly what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of hidden strength and shocking twists, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves a story of justice being served. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you for listening.